Well, I'm all ears.
A pair of vice cops investigate Miami's underworld in some stylish threads and cool wheels.
Hey, don't sweat it, man.
All the time finding as many network television-friendly euphemisms for sex and drugs as was possible.
Spreading around all this pharmaceutical rhino rinse.
So get ready to grind and recirculate while you nasally vacuum the naughty dust in Miami Vice.
Must be rough in Vice, man. Cars, clothing.
Miami Vice, created by Anthony Yerkovich, ran on NBC for 5 seasons from 1984 and was a show that became synonymous with style and pop music. Yet it's far deeper than you would expect for an 80s TV show. Or maybe it really was just style over substance.
We're telling you that Godzilla and Rodan came by and immortalized me.
It's a show aimed at a mature audience rather than kids, though clearly it did have a pretty big following among those too young to drive in a Ferrari without wearing socks. They were also likely to be too young to drive a Ferrari with socks. In fact, forget the socks. The socks are irrelevant. Going forward, this channel will not concern itself with supercar drivers with smelly feet.
The smell goes away in a couple hours.
Miami Vice dwelt on the seedier side of the city's upwardly mobile and glamorous types. There was a mix of rich people involved in the drug trade, their customers, their victims, their suppliers, the people at the very bottom rung of society, and the cops charged with upholding the law. Miami Vice very quickly lets you know what it thinks of the justice system by completely bypassing it for the resolution of most episodes. The series follows the detectives of the Organised Crime Bureau of what was then Metro-Dade Police, or OCB for short, but most of the time the team is known as Miami Vice. So that's where they get the name of the show from. I feel so stupid now.
Everybody freeze, Miami Vice!
The OCB's usual beat was narcotics, prostitution, gambling, fraud, smuggling, arms dealing, violent crimes, etc. But over the course of the series, OCB would be involved with any crime you could think of, whether it just be a simple homicide, a home invasion, a little mild terrorism, some international intrigue, and if you pick the show on a bad day, UFOs.
I am not going to go look for little green men with you.
Suppose we find some.
The OCB team often worked deep undercover, inhabiting separate personas, and at times it's hard for them to return to their normal lives. Where does the fake drug dealer end and the real cop begin? Look, I've been much the same. It's very hard to switch off after I get home from work. After a full day at the funeral home, I often have to stop myself from embalming the parrot.
So you'll set up a meeting between Burnett and his Bahamian banker friend, Mr. Cooper.
Detective John Sonny Crockett was a Vietnam vet working Vice, where he often worked undercover using the alias Sonny Burnett. As part of his cover, he had to maintain a lifestyle that would help him infiltrate Miami's underworld. So he wore fashionable threads, drove a Ferrari, he lived on a boat, and had a pet alligator, Elvis. He'd been married and has a son. He's divorced because the job was so all-consuming. Sonny Crockett is cool under pressure, but he's also weary, grumpy, quite cynical, and while he tries his best to put on a front, the job is slowly whittling him down to nothing, crushing his soul into a tiny cube and sucking out any remaining joy from Crockett's life. But hey, he gets to drive a Ferrari without wearing socks, so swings and roundabouts.
I got a feeling something's not right.
Don Johnson had been in a few features in the early 70s, but was finding it hard to get meaningful roles on television, where he'd appear in random episodes of weekly series or TV movies and not always as the star. And he'd also made a lot of television pilots that were not sold. Miami Vice would change that, where first he'd be that guy from Miami Vice to Don Johnson from TV's Miami Vice to Don Johnson, and then back again to that guy from Miami Vice to that guy from Nash Bridges to Dakota Johnson's dad, and finally to that guy from Miami Vice. He's looking pretty good.
You never know.
Just as Sonny's clothes defined a level of 80s cool, so did Crockett's hairdos, where, depending on the episode, Sonny's hair is fashionably long, then it's fashionably short, then it's fashionably straight, then fashionably spiky, then fashionably long again, a ponytail, then fashionably swept and flowing.
Don't you just love the symmetry of it all?
The show helped popularise the phrase designer stubble, though Sonny is often clean-shaven in many episodes. Personally, I've had some very bad luck with my attempts at designer stubble. It's just been so uncomfortable, which is why I've never actually tried it on my face.
I love it.
Ricardo Rico Tubbs had been a detective in New York who came to Miami looking to bring down the man who killed his brother. Look, it wasn't me, I swear. I was nowhere near the bus station when it happened. Man, I've gotta stop watching so many cop shows, it's making me paranoid. Once in Miami, he liked the place and got a job on the OCB, where he and Sonny would become partners and firm friends.
Real nice. What are you doing here?
Rico was the looser of the pair, though he'd also have to pay a price for working such an intense job. Tubbs and Crockett were a team, and they were pals. They were there for each other when things went poorly.
I just want to be there for you if you need me.
But they weren't against telling each other like it is when the other was getting in too deep.
Well, there's a thin line between hard work and obsession.
You're not in the process of forgetting you're a cop, are you?
Rico's working alias, or nom secret, was Rico Cooper, and he mostly drove around in a classic Cadillac Coupe de Ville, and whenever undercover operations moved to the arrest phase, Rico would produce a previously unnoticeable shotgun from underneath his jacket. Now, that is the mark of a good tailor.
Calderon murdered my son and my woman.
Philip Michael Thomas had been working steadily on stage and television, where he was much more likely to pop up in the sort of program that we talk about on this channel than his co-star was. Miami Vice would be his highest profile television role, where he's forever known as that guy from Miami Vice. No, the other one. Rico didn't drink or smoke or eat meat, which are traits shared by Thomas, but Rico didn't share Thomas's immersion in New Age alternative spirituality, which is like traditional spirituality, but with a more recent copyright date.
And what are they gonna do? Cast a spell on me?
Philip Michael Thomas claims credit for the term EGOT, which of course is an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony, though he's actually not won any of them yet. Fingers crossed.
I think it's just another scam.
The other team members were often just there as backup to Crockett and Tubbs. While Crockett and Tubbs often posed as high-flying drug dealers, Gina and Trudy did most of the paperwork and research, while Zito and Switek were often involved in surveillance. The side characters would often have a feature episode every season or two, but this was very much the Sonny Crockett show and also the Rico Tubbs show, and then everyone else got the crumbs. Saundra Santiago was Gina Calabrese, who at times early in the series shared a friends with benefits relationship with Sonny. At one point she met an East German spy who was her mother's lover in Cuba and unofficially helps him track down the man who killed her mother. Another time she fell for a fucking Egypt looking to shoot down an airliner.
Don't make me kill you!
On other occasions, she allowed her cover to take precedence over her own safety, though since this is Miami Vice, she does settle the score each time. Olivia Brown was her partner and best friend, Trudy Joplin. After shooting a suspect, Trudy takes stock of her life and finds her boyfriend is close to a drug dealer, and she's conflicted about turning this into an investigation.
Being a cop doesn't make for a normal relationship.
She later discovers a rape victim has hired a hitman to kill her attacker. And of course, there's the UFO thing. Both women would divide their time between paperwork, research, using this newfangled thing called a computer, and undercover sting operations where they're dressed as hookers.
I got the looks, steady job.
Cable?
Cable TV, that works.
Michael Talbot was the Elvis-loving schlub Stan Switek, though to clarify that's Elvis Presley and not Elvis the alligator. Though outside of work hours, who knows? Switek's main specialities were experience with surveillance equipment, and when the bugging devices didn't work, firearms.
There's no time. Come get the bodies, guys.
His best buddy was partner Larry Zito, played by John Diehl, where the pair were more casually attired detectives, providing a sharp contrast to the fancy threads sported by Crockett and Tubbs. Head of OCB was Lieutenant Rodriguez, played by Gregory Sierra, who was an easy-to-deal-with superior. What, he dies at the start of the series? Man, I thought it was done with the character sketches. Gregory Sierra apparently asked to be written off the series, and so a replacement character was needed, and needed fast. That replacement character would prove to be very different.
I'm Lieutenant Castillo, your new boss.
Lieutenant Martin Castillo is softly spoken and unreadable as a human being, where he's able to rein in his team with a whisper so powerful that it could instantly freeze a baked potato. The softer his voice, the more fucked you are.
You pulled the trigger. Now, live with the responsibility.
There was a baseless rumor circulated that Vice cops all needed to get their hearing tested when he took over because they all thought they had suddenly gone deaf at the same time. Edward James Olmos on screen is possibly the most intense actor that ever won the award for Most Intense Actor 5 years in a row. And of course he'd win it again years later when he played Commander Adama. Off screen, Olmos was a committed actor, but while studying his first script on the plane to Miami, he'd seen how, like other cop shows, Crockett and Tubbs would dismiss authority figures and scenes. Olmos was determined to not get stuck playing a loud buffoon, and so he delivered his scenes in a way that it was impossible for Crockett and Tubbs to be flip with Castillo. In his first episodes, Olmos didn't look at them while filming scenes, and it added attention to the scenes that worked, and so Olmos didn't look at either of the stars for something like the next 10 episodes.
Don't ever come up to my face like this again.
His way of creating his character didn't gel with Don Johnson, where a simple disagreement over Castillo closing his office door caused Don Johnson to keep the crew waiting for several hours. Johnson didn't want to deal with doors for whatever reason. Perhaps he'd been traumatized in his youth by the end credits to Get Smart.
Interesting theory.
Edward James Olmos was invested in projects that meant a lot to him, and when offered a regular role on the series, he initially declined on the basis that he couldn't sign an exclusive contract. Michael Mann kept offering more and more money until he finally offered Olmos a non-exclusive deal with the only caveat he just needed to give the production 60 days notice of his non-availability. It does sound reasonable though. In my line of work, when I don't want to show up for my shift at McDonald's, I just call them up 10 minutes before I'm supposed to start and tell them I contracted hand, foot and mouth disease, where my mouth and my foot are okay, but my hand is a total disaster.
I'll get in touch with you in a few days.
In interviews, Olmos comes across as a geeky actor, so that on-screen intensity is just him putting in the work.
It's what I am.
Castillo was a man of few smiles and even fewer decibels, and he would eventually receive a very involved backstory from when he was once a DEA agent in Southeast Asia, where things had gone badly. He had married, but things didn't end so well, and then he ended up as a cop in Miami. And of course, anytime somebody from his past turns up, murderous mayhem follows.
Right now, forget about him. Concentrate on the Yakuza.
The Vice Squad wages war on the drug trade, prostitution, gambling, and earth tones. It's an uphill battle trying to stifle human nature, but on the plus side, in Miami at least, the war on the color brown was well and truly won in the first season.
I didn't make that up.
Miami Vice didn't really do typical stories like most cop shows, but in general, Crockett and Tubbs would go undercover posing as drug dealers looking to buy some Colombian baking powder in order to take down this week's drug kingpin. There was always a different one every week. Crockett or Tubbs might get a little close to somebody involved in the trade, or there's some relatively innocent victim whose life is being destroyed by their proximity to the head of some crime organization.
Thinking about fun was like when you wanted to put some catnip in Elvis's kibble.
To maintain their covers, OCB would use items confiscated from previous busts, drugs used to tempt dealers, all the cash to buy drugs, and of course the fancy cars. They're all a result of OCB's successful convictions. Most of Vice drive some older classic convertibles, such as Rico's Cadillac, but Sonny Crockett, living the high life as Sonny Burnett, lived on the boat, the St. Vitus Dance, and it had its own powerboat, and he also drove around town in various Ferraris. When Ferrari originally turned down requests to provide cars for the show, the producers found workarounds. Sonny's original car was a black 1972 Ferrari Daytona, though the examples used in the series were replicas. Ferrari wasn't so happy about that.
It's out and back.
And so from the third season, Ferrari relented and provided the show with 2 Ferrari Testarossa cars.
Absolutely essential for any type of serious police work, huh?
But first, Sonny's original car had to be given a memorable send-off. That's still probably a better deal than what the dealers were offering for a trade.
The off-the-rack look seems to be in this year.
Crockett and Tubbs were the best-dressed cops on television. They were the anti-Columbos. But Miami, it has to be said, is often hot and even oftener humider, and so Don Johnson's look would be pared back to the minimum to cool down. So no belts, no socks, no undershirts, and if you take this to the logical extreme, a fully commando Crockett.
Think about it.
Miami Vice is a brutal show with lots of people dying in service of giving opportunities for Crockett and Tubbs to stare off into space, whether that's staring off into the far distance, the middle distance, or just out of the eye line of the person you're talking to when you're having an awkward conversation with some person in an elevator and you can't remember if their name is either Terry or Tony. The real Miami at the time was often tarred with the epithet of the murder capital of America, and some of that at least is reflected at the end of the episode Freeze Frames.
Bang, you're dead.
The series can be incredibly cynical in how it portrays unethical reporters or lawyers, but the show's real bite is reserved for other cops. Practically every other plainclothes law enforcement officer that you will meet in this series that is not a currently serving member of OCB is damaged in some way. Either they've been corrupted, or have become obsessed, or for some reason are in some way not an especially glowing example of law enforcement.
Bad cops, Rico. There's nothing lower.
Episodes, particularly from season 2 onwards, would often not end with an arrest, but with a villain ending up dead. either as a result of a shootout with the police or because some victim took matters into their own hands.
Bye, Daddy.
This happens so much you'd think court dockets or jails would be looking rather empty.
Surf's up, pal.
If this week's villain had anything to do with messing with members of OCB on a personal level, then that villain is almost certainly going to end up dead by the time the executive producer credit flashed on screen. But sometimes, just for a change, the antagonist will finish the job themselves.
Please don't.
Or being taken out by a civilian who's been adversely affected. And if Miami Vice don't kill him, then they'll finish the job. Honestly, throughout all 5 seasons of Miami Vice, you can pretty much count the number of villains who survived the episode on your fingers, and maybe a few toes. As a result, there are very few returning villains, which is obviously understandable, because unless reincarnation was part of the story, a second face-off was going to be, might difficult.
These two pay retail.
Some of those villains who did survive their first episode and return to the series will almost certainly be killed in the second episode. In episodes where the villain doesn't die or return to be killed, some innocent person, or at least a good-hearted type who got in over their heads, they'll instead be killed. I mean, you gotta kill someone. That's why my latest business venture, Miami Undertaking, is being listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and according to Reddit, it's going to the moon. So make sure you only take financial advice from random people on social media. It does not constitute solid financial advice.
What is this, a joke? Yeah.
So many episodes revolve around revenge, whether it's revenge of the Vice Squad or revenge on the Vice Squad. Though at no point does Elvis take revenge on the drug dealer wearing his brother.
Hey, listen, we're very upwardly nubile.
There are the informants. Charlie Barnett as Noogie appears in some episodes, but it's Izzy Moreno, played memorably by Martin Ferrero, who would be trying his hand at a new business or scam in each appearance, all the while mangling the English language.
It is getting into artificial insubordination.
Unlike this channel, Miami Vice wasn't too cool to have comedy, though usually it involved episodes with Izzy or Noogie, and occasional episodes focusing on Zito and Switek. Actors Talbot and Diehl often improvised most of their comedic scenes together.
I think Darlene's hair looks great. It oughta. People spend less time raising their children.
Miami Vice, particularly the undercover aspects in the relationship between Crockett and Tubbs, owes maybe more than a little to the 70s hit Starsky and Hutch, but there are also a few superficial links between both series. Anthony Yerkovich and Michael Mann both worked on the earlier show, Edward James Olmos and Philip Michael Thomas both guested on it, and both the stars of Starsky and Hutch would direct episodes of Miami Vice. Miami Vice was Starsky and Hutch's cooler cousin who didn't wear no stinking socks, but did wear stinking shoes.
Hey, Crockett, now you tell this lapdog of yours he makes any false moves, I'm gonna make a suitcase out of it.
There are, of course, 2 stories about the origins of Miami Vice.
We got a choice?
3, if you count the one I made up about the wannabe scriptwriters from Alpha Centauri, whose only exposure to Earth culture was the movie Scarface. The most popular story is that NBC executive Brandon Tartikoff wrote down MTV Cops, and then the show magically appeared like that.
Whether it works or not, it doesn't matter.
The second story is from the show's actual creator, Anthony Yerkovich. He'd been a writer on the critical darling Hill Street Blues and was interested in a Miami set cop show. He'd been reading about how much undeclared money was coming into the country through Florida, as well as how local cops used confiscated goods in the fight against vice in Miami.
You and your vice cop buddies were just the flip side of the same coin from these dealers you're always masquerading around with.
Yerkovich had a deal with Universal, who shopped his pilot script for a series called Gold Coast to NBC. Michael Mann had been a TV writer and by the early 80s had started to direct features. He was brought in to produce this new show, now called Miami Vice. Yerkovich's active involvement with the series was mainly during the first season, but it was Michael Mann who was in ultimate control of the series. Mann considered the pilot script to be okay, but to him it conjured beige images. Mann had his own idea of the look and feel of the series, that it would be well photographed with stylish images. Colours were deliberately coordinated. There would be no earth tones, no browns, no reds, and a lot of pastels. And because it was Miami, there was more neon than a sign factory having a Black Friday sale. Miami Vice does feel like a rare 1980s series where the art direction was more important than the story. Miami Vice pilot director Thomas Carter also helped define the show's visual look, with long sequences of cars driving through the streets at night, and music. Music would become very important to Miami Vice.
Hey, Elvis, where does Crockett get his music? Sears and Roebuck catalog?
The city of Miami is almost a character in the series, and it's one wearing a lot of makeup that's well lit and shot from its best angles.
Make you feel good or bad?
Strange.
Locations were often chosen for their visual interest, and the production was not above radically redressing a space to get the effect they wanted.
It was real, wasn't it?
When Brian De Palma's 1983 film Scarface was in production, local authorities in Florida were not especially happy with the film's subject matter, nor were they especially cooperative, leading to the bulk of the film eventually being shot in Los Angeles. The attitude of the locals softened significantly when it came time to shoot the weekly episodes of Miami Vice. And after the show was a hit, the local police and film office couldn't do enough to help the series. Close down streets? Sure, you got it. Blow up a building? Sure, you got it. Miami Vice's success would rehabilitate the image of Miami to a point where it would significantly boost tourism.
I'm just happy to be back in the real world.
Yeah, if you can call Miami real.
Miami had a small film and television industry dating back to the 60s, where Ivan Tors had set up a production facility where he made series like Flipper and Gentle Ben.
Yeah, well, that's all in the past, Rico.
Tors' old studios would become the production base for Miami Vice's weekly episodes. Some interiors, such as the OCP headquarters, would be filmed here, as well as interiors for individual episodes, though the vast majority of the series' interiors and exteriors would be filmed in and around Miami. The show looked great most of the time, though every now and then in early years you would have an interior scene that just looked off. Now, I can't say for certain that these were or weren't shot on a set, it's just that these scenes have an unreality about the design and lighting that just makes them look like sets recycled from a local amateur dramatic society's production of Soylent Green. Season 1 starts with a feature-length pilot episode. New York cop Ricardo Tubbs is in Miami on the trail of drug dealer Calderone, who was responsible for his brother's death. Meanwhile, Sonny's partner is killed by a car bomb. Rico and Sonny will eventually cross paths, where they've been working on the same case from different angles.
New York.
Crockett's boss suggests that they work together, and after a touchy start, their partnership just works. Rico then considers making the move to Miami permanent.
You ever consider a career in Southern law enforcement?
Throughout seasons 1 and 2, Sonny will try to reconcile with his estranged wife, Caroline.
But it's not gonna work out.
Later, he'll get so deep into a new relationship that he lets his colleagues down. Things don't always break Rico's way either.
Hang on, Tubbs. I want to park this thing.
He'll finally deal with Calderone, who killed his brother, but also falls for his daughter and will eventually father a child with her, until both the child and the mother are killed by her brother, who is also the uncle of Rico's son, and who will later set up Rico to be killed during a remote island getaway. Rico's former girlfriend Valerie, played by Pam Grier, was a New York cop who will show up from time to time to complicate Rico's life.
A burnout cop, Rico, and you knew that.
When you write the words, "has a pet alligator on his boat" in a pilot script, you think, cool. But then in a weekly series, you actually have to go and film scenes with an alligator on a boat. Hence, Elvis the alligator would be seen less and less, where after a while he was just conveniently out of shot. In later seasons, we'd go to the boat less and less, and Elvis just sort of disappears from the series altogether without much explanation.
How about those Lakers, huh? Buck for MVP, huh?
In season 3, boxing aficionado Larry Zito is killed, possibly as a budgetary move, and because John Diehl wanted to go and work on serious acting, where he'd of course go off to a solid career in movie and television guest roles.
I think I've been in the business too long. I'm starting to fall for the players.
Sonny would have some really bad woes. In one episode, Sonny collects his flight attendant girlfriend from the airport, and she dies from an overdose after transporting drugs in her stomach. Another girlfriend is a young doctor played by Helena Bonham Carter, who turns out to be a high-functioning but incredibly serious heroin addict. And that's when it gets really bad for him. Yet another girlfriend played by Johnson's on and off again wife, Melanie Griffith, was probably going to be alright. She was a businesswoman. But she's also a madam. Season 4 started a trend of a semi-serialized feel, where Sonny is ordered to protect a former rock star, Caitlin. The pair immediately snipe at each other, but then very quickly they fall in love and get engaged by the end of the episode. They will marry just as Caitlin's career revival takes off, and Sonny will quickly find himself a spare part in her world. Though it is lucky that he's around, because there are people trying to kill her. While Caitlin was on tour, Sonny had been shot and was close to death, with everybody reminiscing about Sonny while they waited to see if yep, this was a damn clip show.
What's this kiss done to you?
And in something that's no surprise to anybody who's been watching, Caitlin is murdered at a concert as a way to take revenge on Sonny. It's funny how Game of Thrones eventually got that reputation for killing off so many characters. Without those brutal deaths, Vice would not have those lost-in-thought moments of staring off into space.
Amnesia, schizo breakdown, whatever.
It gets weirder. The very next episode after his wife's murder, Sonny is back at work, undercover as Burnett, but he's soon badly injured when an undercover operation goes bad, and when he wakes up, he has no memory of being Detective Sonny Crockett. Instead, he truly believes he is Sonny Burnett, drug dealer. Season 4 ends with Sonny believing that he's a gangster. When the show returned for its 5th and final season, Sonny was now a ruthless killer working his way up the ranks of a crime lord's family, eventually setting himself up as an evil crime boss. I mean, you know he's evil because he has the ponytail. For a cop, there are several lines that should never be crossed. One of them is wanton multiple murder, and the other is giving yourself a tiny, tiny ponytail. I mean, at that point, why bother? Having tracked down his partner, Rico tries to jog Sonny's memory.
Sonny, it's me, Rico.
Who repays the favour by trying to shoot Rico. Now that's the last straw. This time, Sonny is totally out of the OCB lottery syndicate. Sonny's memory does come back, and within a few episodes, he's back at work as if nothing had ever happened, despite his amnesiac alter ego having killed several criminals, including a dirty cop. Miami Vice would continue its 5th season, but not as before. The show was segmented, with Sonny and Rico now featuring in alternate episodes, with the other one only appearing in a scene or two at best. The show had always alternated between its leads being featured more heavily in an episode, but here it's really obvious. The other members of OCB featured more, and there are occasions where it's clear that they gave Stan lines written for Don Johnson.
Why doesn't any of this surprise me?
Castillo is barely in the back end of the season, where he only appears in a handful of episodes. It's almost as if everyone had their eye on their next gig and just wanted to get their season out of the way with the minimum of fuss. A writer's strike in 1988 and a not entirely successful attempt to re-inject some life into the show didn't help. After 5 seasons, Miami Vice was done in May of 1989.
Because we've been cancelled.
What?
Well, sort of. A few episodes weren't originally screened during the series' first run and would be screened alongside reruns. But then, for real, Miami Vice was done.
Don't think about it.
Behind the scenes was not always overly harmonious at times. By most accounts, Johnson and Thomas seem to have worked well together, and we've already mentioned the initial coolness once Olmos joined the series. Saundra Santiago would express her displeasure to producers about her character not being given much to do.
I'm trying to do my job.
In between seasons 2 and 3, when the show was at its absolute peak in ratings and popularity, Don Johnson and his representatives attempted to renegotiate the star's contract.
I've worked out this deal, and it goes something like this.
This involved more than just a strongly worded letter and a gift basket. Johnson just flat out didn't turn up for work.
We're pretty wasted.
The production attempted to shoot around the star's absence, and indeed other actors were being lined up as potential replacements, but eventually Johnson accepted a new deal and returned to work. Even though Michael Mann was mainly to be found in Los Angeles, and even then he was working on other projects like his films or TV creation Crime Story, he did keep a very firm grip on the show. Michael Mann's management style was to go to the set and fire somebody on day one. As a management style, it's a choice. Not necessarily a pleasant choice, but there is a silver lining. It has opened up career opportunities for me, where producers will hire me at the start of a new TV series, specifically so they can cement their authority by publicly firing me in front of the cast and crew. It's a living.
This conversation's over.
Miami Vice was not a smash hit out of the gate. It had a relatively late Friday night time slot, and it just squeaked into the top 40 programs for the year. It was renewed anyway, and summer reruns saw the show bringing in good numbers. The second season of the show was where Miami Vice became a top 10 hit. It was now the show you had to watch if you wanted people to think you were cool. I mean, it could be worse. You could be like my cousin Ted, who skipped Miami Vice and instead became a super fan of Magruder and Loud. That's a short-lived series about a married couple who were both cops, but their department didn't allow office relationships, and so they had to pretend they weren't married, even though they had adjoining apartments that was linked by a secret door behind a clock. Ted still maintains that Magruder and Loud is a thoroughly misunderstood masterpiece that's far better than Miami Vice. Oh God, Ted's such a dork.
I'll be watching.
Most episodes of Miami Vice would take around 7 to 8 days to shoot in Miami, while the writing and post-production was based in Los Angeles. With its high amount of location work, need for expensive props and clothes, and a budget for music licensing, and the sundry expenses like shoe deodorizer, alligator diapers, hearing aids, etc., Miami Vice cost a lot, with a budget of around $1.3 to $1.4 million an episode during its early years.
I could blow $1 million in a weekend.
That was on the high side for an 80s television series, and the cost of making the show was the source of some grumbling behind the scenes at both NBC and Universal.
Hope you die impotent.
As with most series, Universal licensed episodes to NBC for less than the cost of making the episodes, with the model that they'd make up the difference and eventually swing into profit with foreign sales and syndication, that is, selling rerun rights to television stations. However, in the mid-80s, that guaranteed pile of gold had started to prove elusive for new shows, and in a flat market, the new stuff just wasn't doing as well as the old stuff.
The thing I can't figure out, though, is why.
Indeed, reduced projected syndication income was the reason the studio gave for killing off a show like Knight Rider.
We either had to kill him or give him a medal.
NBC obviously wanted Vice to continue, but it felt production costs were the studio's problem. At the time, there was a threat that Miami Vice would shift production to Los Angeles as a way to get more control over the show's budget. But a deal was done, and Miami Vice stayed Miami Vice for the rest of its run.
Goodbye, street. Hello, jail.
I've been to jail. Jail sucks.
Season 3 saw some shuffling of behind-the-scenes personnel, where one notable addition to the show was writer-producer Dick Wolf. Wolf had been writing and producing the critical darling Hill Street Blues and had to wrangle himself out of his contract to take the job on Miami Vice, which, while it was a big hit, was seen by some of his peers as a step down in terms of prestige. Wolf, on the other hand, saw his new role as making sure Miami Vice told stories with a beginning, a middle, and an end, preferably in that order. From Season 3, series plots would seem a little less abstract than previous years, but there was also a slightly more grounded nature to the scripts, which would change the show's focus slightly.
Yeah.
But don't worry, there would still be many opportunities for the stars to stare off into the middle distance.
Woof.
Dick Wolf's arrival at Miami Vice reminds me, for some reason, of the time I went camping in Wyoming, and this animal kept on raiding our tent for food. At the time, I remember thinking to myself, gee, what a Dick Wolf. When you think of Wolf's Law & Order franchise and his work on Hill Street Blues before the series, it is so hard to imagine him being in sync with Miami Vice. But it was the contrast that attracted him to the series.
Anybody who's everybody's here.
Miami Vice would have a lot of guests over 5 years, some big and some not so big, but the show was popular enough that guests were all paid the same rate regardless of profile. Miami Vice generally had a younger cast than most 80s series, and rather than see all of the familiar character actors playing villains of the week, Miami Vice would feature a lot of people who were relative unknowns at the time, but have since become big stars. It wasn't necessarily apparent at the time, but if you're watching Miami Vice now, there are more familiar faces than looking through your high school yearbook while recovering from severe concussion. There were so many before they were famous appearances in Miami Vice. I'm not going to go and break them out. I'm not going to tell you which episodes they were all in, because this sequence would just take hours to get through. You'll just have to trust me that everybody who'd become anyone was in Miami Vice. Annette Bening, Julia Roberts, Wesley Snipes, Bill Paxton, Giancarlo Esposito, John Leguizamo, Ian McShane. But no, I said I wasn't going to list them all. There are just too many to name. Jimmy Smits, Ed O'Neill, Bruce Willis, Pam Grier, Dean Stockwell, Liam Neeson. Screw it. They're all in it. Just assume they're all in it. And if they weren't in Miami Vice, then they damn well wish they were.
Does the word undercover mean anything to you?
Music was a huge part of the series, hence why the MTV Cop story has become so well disseminated.
He just devoured my entire Buddy Holly collection.
Pop music wasn't just playing behind the action, but it'd be playing at full volume with near wordless action in the background. Popular songs would appear over montages of driving, or action, or romance sequences, or people just staring off into the distance. It started in the pilot with the use of Phil Collins' 1981 single, In the Air Tonight, and just went from there with dozens of popular and not so popular 80s songs being heard in the series. And then musicians would often play guest roles on the show. Phil Collins, Willie Nelson, Glenn Frey, Sheena Easton as Crockett's doomed second wife, Miles Davis, Frank Zappa, James Brown, and more. Some of them also wrote songs specifically for the show. Not all of the music was brought in, with composer Jan Hammer providing the show's score for most of the first 4 seasons. Hammer's music was almost entirely produced electronically, using a mix of synthesizers and samplers. If you need to know the difference, a synth plays an electronically generated tone, while samplers are synthesizers that play back snippets of recorded sounds at different pitches. Pitches. Hammer's scores don't often try to pretend that they're real instruments, and it's one of the 80s series where the synth scores don't sound cheap and nasty. Crockett's theme would be one of those rare pieces of incidental music from a television show that viewers would remember. Humour's Miami Vice theme appeared in two forms. The very first few episodes have a version that sounds like an early mix without the main melody, and then most episodes will have the full version with that soaring guitar sound. Which, like the drums and everything else in the Miami Vice theme, is all electronic. Albums from the series were released and sold very well, and the single version of the Miami Vice theme was one of the few television themes to hit the top of the Hot 100 Billboard charts. Humour would leave the series during the show's 4th year, with the show's soundtrack now composed by Tim Truman for the final year. The most obvious difference is that there was a lot more echoey live blues guitar. Miami Vice's use of music has two side effects. There were more opportunities for staring off into the distance while the music underscored the scene's emotion, and also to somehow make Phil Collins seem cool.
You're English.
Norwegian, actually, but I had the operation.
We've mentioned a lot of episodes and storylines, but there are a couple of episodes that stand out in one way or another, both good and bad. We'll start with the lesser episodes, so obviously The Clip Show, A Bullet for Crockett in Season 4, and the Backdoor Pilot, Leap of Faith, which is about as much like a proper episode of Miami Vice as it is a second encore at a Metallica concert. The infamous episode Missing Hours.
Hi guys, go about what you're doing.
As Trudy eventually believing that she's had an encounter with a UFO. James Brown plays a kind of UFO encounter evangelist who's also a former music star whose hit was, coincidentally enough, also called I Feel Good.
You just don't understand unless you've been through it.
Been through it? You mean you took a ride?
This is some of the weirdest scenes in Miami Vice, and if we're honest, they're not especially well done.
Trudy, put that piece away, will you?
Viking Bikers from Hell is terrible. It's got a lot of fun action, but it's otherwise ridiculous in a watchably terrible way. Like when you find out that your school's head librarian live streams herself drunkenly reacting to Wordle videos. The Big Thor. Oof.
Come on, guys, help get some ice over there. Come on!
It's about a music star who died and his body is frozen, and several people are jockeying to control what happens to his remains. It's one of the less successful comedy episodes.
Put the sushi over there. Split the tip amongst you all, okay?
I've seen how some Vice fans don't like funnier episodes in general, but Cows of October is silly fun, if only for the various ways to describe bull semen without saying bull semen all the time.
Bull semen.
Bull sauce.
Bullismo.
Semen.
Some of the really excellent episodes, the series pilot, My Brother's Keeper, Evan saw Sonny relive his regret at not providing enough help to a closeted colleague, Out Where the Buses Don't Run had a former Vice cop who may have gone round the twist. He's somehow providing very good tips in an investigation, only to find out that it was his way to make a sort of confession. In Walk Alone, Tubbs went undercover in a prison and Castillo has to go in to bust him out. There are the various Castillo episodes that delve into his shady past. In these episodes, he's treated like an expert in the customs of every country in Asia. Forgive Us Our Debts has Sonny trying to prevent the execution of Hackman. Crockett successfully proves his innocence, only to find out that he's been played. It goes without saying that Hackman returns in a later episode, where he murders Sonny's wife Caitlin, and of course is finally executed at the end of the episode. That's not killed in a shootout, he is executed. Sonny's amnesia arc, covering several episodes from Season 4 and Season 5, is interesting enough, though it's about as believable as Uncle Reg's resume. Now, there is no way he was ever a practicing acupuncturist.
Sonny's not Sonny anymore.
The crew of Miami Vice knew the show was winding down, but there was still one eye on a potential spin-off. The series' anti-penultimate episode, that's the third last episode, not a relative having a seizure.
I can change all that with my little pill.
Leap of Faith was a backdoor pilot for a series about young cops. Basically, it was the same setup as 21 Jump Street, with Laura San Giacomo and a couple of douchey dudes as young cops going undercover in schools.
There has got to be a better way for me to spend my adult life.
The finale, Freefall, was a feature-length episode to close out the series. And unlike so many weekly series of the 80s, it has a very definite ending. In watching it, all of the things you noticed during Season 5 are really exaggerated here. Crockett and Tubbs are pressed into a mission for the feds where they have to extract a dictator who's about to be overthrown by rebels, but the drug cartels want the dictator to remain in power. The rebels help the Americans to rescue their deadly enemy, and then back in Miami, Crockett and Tubbs can't trust the feds or the man they rescued, and it ends up with a very confusing ending where Crockett and Tubbs shoot down a plane even though they've resigned as cops. Stan's gambling addiction had started to pop up in some Season 5 episodes, and here he's compromised and suspended by Castillo. Stan's reaction is to basically set up the thugs he owes money to and shoot them, and then that's the end of his story arc. Gina and Trudy are barely in this, and Edward James Olmos' 2 scenes are shot in a way that he only shares the screen with Michael Talbot, and it's clear that he was shot separately from Johnson and Thomas in their only scene together. This last episode is entertaining-ish, but then so is somebody else walking into a glass sliding door. This final episode really does start to fall apart towards the end, where character motivations are changing from scene to scene. The final act feels cobbled together, just so that there's an ending. The series always had a cynical attitude, but here it's turned into full-blown fatalism and nihilism. Tubbs is convinced he might die, while Crockett just doesn't care what the future holds.
Because this one ain't no trip to Cleveland.
The episode ends with a montage of the series, while Crockett drives Tubbs to the airport as they each ponder their futures.
You ever consider a career in Southern law enforcement?
The cast and crew would go their separate ways. Don Johnson was the series' breakout star, and the one you'd most likely hear about his private life in tabloids or various movie roles, though they tended to be more middle-range dramas than movies expected to be blockbusters or summer tentpoles. He'd returned to television in the mid-90s as a San Francisco cop in Nash Bridges. Philip Michael Thomas would do less acting and much more of whatever the hell the Philip Michael Thomas International Psychic Network was.
He's psychic.
Thomas would make an appearance with Johnson on Nash Bridges. Edward James Olmos would continue to do whatever serious, intense and brooding roles came his way, and would later anchor Ronald D. Moore's version of Battlestar Galactica. The rest of the cast of Miami Vice would go back to appearing in guest shots in other series and various movie roles. Michael Mann would take his own stock and trade visually dazzling but occasionally a little bit empty style of thriller and become his own mini-industry with films like Manhunter, Heat, Ali, Last of the Mohicans, Collateral, Public Enemies, and as we'll soon see, he would return to the world of Miami Vice.
You might miss Miami Vice.
Nope, summer, reruns.
Miami Vice's influence was everywhere. It was quickly picked up as something to parody.
Those Vice cops drive on TV comes with little miniature plastic drug dealers.
And long after the series left the air,
where's Tubbs?
The series would become a shorthand for the 1980s, or sort of 1980s.
What else you got? Crockett and Tubby.
In 2002, the video game Grand Theft Auto Vice City was, let's be kind and say, heavily inspired by the show. So much so that Vice City was almost a Miami Vice game in all but name, except that you played as a crook. Philip Michael Thomas even lent his voice to a character in the game, and Vice City, despite being turned around very quickly by Rockstar North, has become considered a video game classic. Other video games used a similar vibe, such as a Scarface adaptation or Hotline Miami, but Vice City remains a beloved title.
Yeah, but no one but a cop could get within a mile of that place.
If it's only a little weird, it definitely won't work.
A lot of highly admired and groundbreaking 80s series seem to have been more or less forgotten by the cultural zeitgeist. Critical darlings of the day like Hill Street Blues, LA Law and 30-something may have scooped all of the awards in the 80s, but apart from the loyalist of fans, they've almost been forgotten. I mean, not totally forgotten, but they are a bit like your birth certificate. You know it's there, but damned if you know where it is right this second. Miami Vice has stuck around as something that even people who weren't born in the 80s will know about, even if it's just through cultural osmosis.
Man, those are skill sets.
Having put out a number of well-regarded thrillers, Michael Mann returned to the world of Miami Vice with a 2006 feature film that he wrote and directed. Now, you might think Michael Mann was the perfect artist to reboot Miami Vice, but when you watch the film, you do remember that he didn't actually direct a single episode and only has a single writing credit on one show. In the Miami Vice feature, the characters are there, in name at least, though aside from name recognition making a thriller easier to market, there is very little reason to call it Miami Vice. And it's a decent enough thriller, if not exactly a top-tier movie.
Money laundering networks.
It would take years to put together a deal like this.
Colin Farrell was an almost too far gone Sonny Crockett, and Jamie Foxx as a less chill Tubbs. They're Miami cops who become involved in an FBI investigation of drug smuggling, and things kind of spiral from there.
We didn't come down here to audition for business. Business auditions for us.
Tubbs and Trudy are in a relationship, and at one point she's kidnapped and injured in an explosion. Sonny becomes involved with the wife of the villain they're tracking, and while Castillo, Gina, Switek and Zito are there, the film almost exclusively follows the story of Sonny, and to a lesser extent, Tubbs.
This is the only deal.
It's a film with an oddly high number of Irish and British actors in the cast, and it's oddly emptier than even the most vacuous Miami Vice episode, with Tubbs and Crockett just ending scenes with posed looks off into the distance. It's got much more sex, violence, and swearing than was possible in 80s television, but it's not got the style.
What the fuck happened, man?
Michael Mann was an early proponent of shooting films on high-definition video, and here he goes handheld for most of the movie. It sits uneasy with the idea of Miami Vice being a glamorous franchise. This film has its style, but most of the time it's gritty and nasty. As a thriller, it's just okay, though the plot does take a backseat to staring wordlessly into the distance. It also doesn't really stoke the embers of nostalgia very much. Sonically, the only bone you get is a cover of In the Air Tonight over the end credits. Jan Hammer's not involved at all. Despite looking like a television production with a decent budget, this was in fact a very expensive feature, costing well over $100 million, and this is a film that didn't come close to making back its budget at the box office. Colin Farrell doesn't have fond memories of the film, and Michael Mann himself has been hot and cold on the movie, where he said the film got away from him and that the ending he'd wanted to shoot would have been far better. Either way, it's just a relatively generic thriller that somebody accidentally stuck the words Miami Vice on. Look, I know, the same thing happened to me for my 16th birthday. There's a director's cut that adds some more scenes focusing on the characters, but doesn't really make the film go from okay to amazing. Though, if it did, that would have to be some sort of magical director's cut.
And now you want off this detail, right?
Got it.
As we post this in late 2025, another Miami Vice film is in the works. Now let's see if this one cooks or is cooked. Either way, I'd better stock up on my microwave popcorn. The fashion fuzz, the pastel pigs, the haute couture heat, the style squad, the chic constabulary, Detective Dernier Cri, Roses and ready-to-wear, that's pret-a-porter police. It's just easy to call this a superficial cops and robbers show. And despite the jazzy appearance, there is actually a lot of depth and introspection that's missing from other 80s classics. Miami Vice's reputation never really went away, but now it's considered one of those 80s classics where it was the most 80s TV show of the 80s, an evergreen show that will crop up in all those lists of the best series of the 1980s from people who probably weren't even around in the 80s, but it's just that good, that underscores the show's cultural impact. As for me, I only watched Miami Vice a little bit back in the day. I'd usually catch the end of an episode, but because I was the sort of person who hates not seeing something from the start, I sort of skipped it. But now I've watched Miami Vice in full for this review, and I really, really enjoyed it. A lot of the shows we cover on this channel are made with the expectation of a young audience, and as such, there's a fair bit of cheese to get through when you watch them when you're much older. Miami Vice is a much more mature cheese, where it's a little fragrant at times, but it tastes so good.
It's crazy. I'm out of here.
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
But what's Miss Make Plenty of Bucks gonna say when you tell her you're a cop?